The Honourable Member for Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Honourable Member for Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry Housing. Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci à député.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the bloc member for his very friendly introduction and a great speech. I would like to say that this is my first speech on this bill, C-58. The Green Party is in favor of this legislation. It's necessary, and I'm very pleased that we have the opportunity to hold a debate, and I hope a vote in favor by all members in this House. It's very important for the rights of workers and the relationship between workers and employers.
I have the experience, Madam Speaker, before ever becoming involved in partisan politics. I had the real honor of working on behalf of organized labor, trade unions, in that I was a lawyer in Halifax with a firm, the only downtown firm in those days, that in doing labor law only represented union side labor law. All the other downtown firms in Halifax represented the employers. And I had the great honor of working on behalf of the Longshoremen's Union, the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union, and others. So I understand something about labor relations and the importance of having leverage, having some way in which workers have tools to create balance so that the employer doesn't hold all the cards. So we know that when a union goes into a legal strike position, it's very important that they're able to exercise those rights, because they are rights. The difficulty we've had in Canada over many years is that it's the common parlance, the terminology, is that employers will use scab labor. And scab labor translates to the legislation, the language of this legislation, replacement workers. C'est la même chose, les travailleurs.
And replacement workers, or scabs, as they say, is a serious threat to the rights of workers.
A long time coming to this legislation, as my colleague from the Bloc Québécois who just spoke pointed out. The province of Quebec has had legislation to prohibit the use of replacement workers during a legal strike or lockout. That legislation has been in place in Quebec for 46 years. Félicitations encore comme.
Congratulations once again. To hear it again and again that Quebec is the first in doing taking such an important action for the rights of workers, as well as for daycare.
In February, debating this legislation at second reading before a vote that was first tabled in November. And Madam Speaker, while I was waiting for this opportunity to speak this afternoon, I've been going back over Hansard, trying to find any evidence of any speech from any Conservative member of Parliament that would let us know whether they favour the legislation or not. We just tried again with the Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton. I can't find any clear indication, which means I live in hope that my Conservative friends will be voting in favour of getting this legislation passed at second reading and to committee where it does need some improvements. I've needed to see, yes, I know that my friends across the way say they want to keep me in suspense. That's okay. Suspense is lots of fun. But I do hope that everyone in this place across all party lines will vote for this legislation. It does need amendments. I see that the United Steelworkers has made it clear that they would like to see that the exemptions and loopholes in this bill be removed. There are some exemptions that would allow certain categories of workers and volunteers to continue their activities during strikes and lockouts. That certainly undermines the core purpose of this legislation. C'est le but fondamental.
That is the goal of this bill. That is to stop the use of replacement workers. and not to have loopholes for these replacement workers.
Close them up and tighten them up when this bill gets to committee. Another place that I hope we can see improvements in committee is to get rid of the 18-month delay before the bill comes into force. We have seen, and I mentioned the province of Quebec has had this legislation for 46 years. The province of British Columbia also has this legislation. A stable set of labor union or union-employer relations, a system of collective bargaining that's respected really matters. Both sides have their tools, and they need to have access to those tools. It's an unbalanced and therefore less economically secure situation for our economy when the tools to one side are removed. Strikes and lockouts actually last longer when scab labor is used. There is greater stability and greater security for our economy when scab labor is eliminated. And I'd urge the government to amend the legislation to make this stronger. But in looking at this and going back over Hansard to try to find any indication of how my Conservative friends were going to vote, I found that friends from South Shore, St. Margaret's, Megantic-Larab, Essex, Calgary Nose Hill, Calgary Rocky Ridge, Chilliwack Hope, Provencher, Battle River Crowfoot, and Sarnia-Lambton made repeated reference to things that have nothing to do with this legislation. So if I may take a moment just to clarify, when we talk of replacement workers, we mean one thing only, specifically one thing only, the use of scab labor when a union is in a legal position to strike or there is a lockout. Those are the situations in which replacement workers in this legislation, C-58, are referenced and banned. It's unfortunate then that so much of the debate in this House, and we've had very limited debate, we've basically had 3 days with a number of speakers, where over and over again, Conservative members have raised the Stellantis battery plant and its use of federal dollars, and that they are also subcontracting with South Korea. And numerous speeches have made the mistake of referring to workers in that context, workers from South Korea working at Stellantis battery plant in part of a trade agreement that was put in place by the previous Conservative government, that somehow those workers are replacement workers. They are emphatically not replacement workers. Use of workers from other countries under agreements that have been made, and certainly Green Party prefers that all workers in Canada are Canadian workers and live and work here, but we have many, many agreements with large multinationals to use workers from other countries. Just to be very, very clear with people watching from home, those are not replacement workers. They have nothing to do with this legislation. So despite repeated references to that somehow the Liberals are violating their own Bill C-58 by allowing 900 workers from South Korea at the Stellantis battery plant. Those are, and actually I made note of one quote from one of my Conservative colleagues, quote unquote, essentially replacement workers, unquote. Let me just be very, very clear. Those are essentially nothing of the sort. They have nothing to do with Bill C-58. They are not replacement workers. They are, in fact, workers from another country who've been brought in under the kinds of deals that have been organized between transnational corporations and various governments in this country. Not my favorite thing to see workers come in from other countries, but let's not mix up our concepts because I think it creates confusion in the public. This legislation is pure and simply about one thing and one thing only, and that is to defend the rights of workers within trade unions, to support organized labor in this country that has given us so much, from work hours that are reasonable, from banning child labor, to many social improvements right across this country. We can thank organized labor, and workers who go out on strike should never have to see their colleagues crossing a picket line to continue to support the unfair practices of an employer when a union is in a legal strike position. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank this House for its time and allow the Green Party to go on record strongly in favor of C-58 and strongly in favor of improving it and strengthening it in committee. Merci beaucoup, Miigwech.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member from the Green Party for her support of this bill. Madam Speaker, I wonder if the Honourable Member could talk a bit more about the maintenance of activities agreement that is proposed in this bill, where we would be working with the Canada Industrial Relations Board prior to any strike action to establish what maintenance activities are required for safety or environmental protection, and that this goal of having prior agreements would also help us to have less strikes and shorter strikes if they do occur.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
My honourable colleague from Guelph, there are reasonable elements to the proposition that before a strike there's an agreement on what's absolutely necessary to take place, but I am concerned by the criticisms from Unifor, from the United Auto Workers and others, that these represent potential loopholes. From the steel workers, United Steelworkers, I would want to make sure that in expert evidence in committee, it's absolutely nailed down that such provisions do not constitute loopholes that weaken the rights of workers. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Ms. Jones, you've got questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
And although I have the utmost respect for the member opposite, I just want to clarify for her, because in my riding, with respect to the Stellantis deal and the 1,600 replacement Korean workers, they went down to see what the work was. And it's carbon steel welding that all of the welders in my riding can do. So it actually is replacement workers, contrary to what the members opposite would say. Thank you.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I'm sorry to my honourable colleague from Sarnia-Lambton. I respect so much her pioneering work in engineering, but I went to law school, and it doesn't mean I know more, but I do know that replacement workers are one thing only, and that is in trade, in trade union relations and collective bargaining. Replacement workers are scab workers, not workers who come from another country who do work Canadians could otherwise do. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Berthier-Masquinongé.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. I'd like to thank my colleague for Saanich Gulf Islands for her speech. I'm not surprised that she supports this bill. She has progressive values, and she genuinely supports this type of legislation. We're very happy to hear that she does, because the Bloc Québécois strongly supports this. I also appreciated that during her speech, she recognized that Quebec was a leader in this kind of legislation. For 47 years, Quebec has had anti-scab legislation. Because of federal jurisdiction, which we're trying to get rid of in Quebec, there are two classes of workers. We were also leaders in dental care, Medicare, and child care. Canada can draw inspiration from Quebec, and we're pleased to see that. Does my colleague not think that given that Canada is drawing inspiration from Quebec, it should also not harm Quebec? It should recognize Quebec and give it the appropriate sums of money. That doesn't apply with anti-scab legislation, but it does apply with dental care and Medicare. Because this new federal program will add a new structure and harm the existing Quebec structure. Doesn't she believe that, with all due respect, we should get the money we deserve and have these new programs for Canada without harming Quebec?
Gulf Islands.
I'd like to thank my dear colleague. I agree entirely, except for one thing, which is that the rest of Canada deeply needs Medicare, and if there is a dispute over money between the provinces and the federal government,
I don't want to, at this point, say that absolutely Quebec's approach should be protected in terms of the money, because we'll get a better deal in pharmacare when there is one buyer, single payer, that can drive down the price of pharmaceuticals.
But I would also like to congratulate my colleague on the fact that Quebec is always the first to fight climate change and against the fossil fuel industry.
Over East.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I also want to say thank you to the member from Saanich and the Gulf Islands for her excellent speech. Absolutely, anti-scab legislation is necessary, and we need to get on board. The NDP has tried to move it 8 times in the last 15 years, and finally the moment has arrived. My quick question to the member is this. One of the issues that we have concerns with is not a perfect piece of legislation. However, this is what we got. With the implementation date in the legislation, it is extremely long, 120 days. Does the member think that that needs to be shortened?
Very brief answer from the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
To Vancouver, my friend from Vancouver East, absolutely 18 months is too long. It makes no sense. Let's get that fixed in committee.
Je sais pas, mais